The pull towards wanting to be seen and felt cared about versus the pull towards pushing people away and pushing yourself to self-destruction. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is very high quality, and I'm definitely going to recommend it to you. Maybe less so on the sort of weird spectrum, as there are some weird elements, but it's mostly normal, and that's sometimes what I talk about here on this channel. It's a story about eating disorders and also cancer. I am referring to Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, which was published in 2021. I should just note that the art is very interesting. It's a girl falling, and then you can see like connecting hands on the book sort of pages, and then another girl right there showing two women in the process of sort of falling, of their life kind of falling apart, which is a lot about what this book is about. But for those who don't know, Mary Choi is a Korean American writer. She's written a number of books, including this one, but also Emergency Contact and Permanent Record. I think those are her only two novels that she's written. The rest is comic books that she's written for Marvel and or DC. Haven't read those, but it's an interesting sort of jump into a different sort of literature path. And she also hosts podcasts, including Hey Cool Job and Hey Cool Life, which I believe I've heard about, but I haven't actually listened to. And then she's also written a number of articles and worked on TV too, quite a bit going on for her life. And it does seem like she tries to infuse parts of her life or part of Korean culture in her writing, especially the customs and tradition and whatnot. You see a little bit of that in Yolk. I wonder if that's the same for Emergency Contact and Permanent Record. And she also has a history of bulimia or eating disorders, which is a very large part of this book. And I do have to wonder how much of this book is based on her life, because it does seem like there's this is maybe a bit semi-autobiographical, like the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Both of those are kind of harrowing when you realize that they're writing about their life, because so many awful things seem to have happened to them. It's a very fascinating book, and I picked it up from my local library at random. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They will definitely have cool books like this. I very much enjoyed it. I'm going to recommend it, but I'm not going to really spoil it. Plus, my new rule is 20 years, and I don't spoil anything that's newer than 20 years. So this is 2021, so I won't spoil it in the summary section, but I might do that in the analysis section. So just be aware of that. Maybe go out and read it and then come back and have a discussion or something with me. But without further ado, let's talk about Yolk. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Yolk focuses on Jayne. She is a marketing college student living in New York City. She's broke. She's living in what is essentially a slum where her landlord hasn't put her on the lease, and it also appears to be like an illegal sublet. Nobody's really fixing anything in the apartment, so it's filled with roaches and mildew and all kinds of gross things. But she doesn't really feel like she deserves much greater than that, which we learn more about throughout the story. She's living with an annoying boyfriend, sort of boyfriend, a guy named Jeremy. He's a bit of a pretentious hipster. They were in a relationship that was sort of casual, and then they kind of drifted apart. And now he's bringing guys or girls over to the apartment, he's sleeping on, or he's having sex on Jayne's bed while she's sleeping on the couch. She doesn't really say much about that because she's dealing with a lot. She's going through a lot of emotional turmoil throughout the story, seeing a therapist, but not really telling that therapist too much, just kind of sort of there. and hoping that the therapist finds her interesting, which is not really how therapy is supposed to work. And so Jayne's kind of struggling, maybe hitting rock bottom at various points throughout this story. And she also is dealing with binge eating disorder, bulimia. It's never really said out loud what it is. It's just not anorexia, most likely. It's a form of binge eating disorder. So she's eating lots of food and then throwing up and hoping nobody really notices throughout the story. And at the beginning, she runs into her sister June at a restaurant, and June tells her that she has cancer. And Jayne is alarmed by that and really sad for her sister. But we find out there's been a previous falling out, which extends back to when they were growing up in a very difficult household with demanding parents. And this falling out has sort of led to them not really talking. Once they both moved to New York, they've drifted apart, only talking when really necessary. But now they're coming back, and it feels like there's more confidence in Jayne as a result. And she starts by kicking Jeremy out of the apartment, but he comes back even when Jayne comes back throughout the story, because she's splitting her time between that apartment and June's. And indeed, she does begin staying with June, finding her house to be a lot better than her apartment. And June even sees Jayne's apartment as like, this is illegal. You should not be living like this. Come stay with me. And everything seems to be going great for them. But unfortunately, as Jayne is staying with June, she learns that June has been using Jayne's identity, that June lost her job due to struggles with her boss. And so because she doesn't have insurance, she's been using Jayne's identity as a college student in order to sort of get access to health insurance through the college. Which seems to work for June, but now she has to pretend to be Jayne. And whenever Jayne goes to doctor's appointments with June, she has to pretend to be June. And nobody can really tell the difference because they are, because of racism. Like, people say, oh, these two Korean women look similar. So they're not going to really ask questions about it. And Jayne is taken aback by all of this because June is lying to her, and Jayne kind of storms out and at that point and decides to go to a bar in order to feel something, in order to have more control. And she spends she invites a friend from high school out that she hasn't talked with in some time, a guy named Patrick, who seems really nice, very much a gentleman. He's also Korean, and they bond over their shared Korean generational traumas. And they get closer as a result. He invites her back because she feels like she doesn't really have a place to stay in that moment. And he's very kind to her, and Jayne even feels like she wants to start a relationship with Patrick. But he's kind of holding off on that right now for reasons that he doesn't really talk about. But it is clear that they both want to be in each other's lives at that point. And then from there, eventually Jayne goes back to the June's apartment. They have more arguments, especially at the doctor's office. And it's revealed that June's cancer is ovarian and that she has to get a hysterectomy. And she's not going to be able to have children in the future. So Jayne is a little bit upset about that. But she's determined to have sex one final time, and they end up throwing a party as a result of that. But also in this story, Jayne and June go back home to Texas, where Jayne and June reunite with their parents. They find it much quieter, which they sort of enjoy, but Jayne also prefers the lights and sound of the city, so she doesn't have to sit alone with her thoughts. And we see Jayne's past relationship with her mother at this point, how Jayne didn't really have that great of a relationship because she was the youngest and her mother was very critical of her. And at one point, her mom even ditched the family and went somewhere that they don't really know. We find out later near the end of the story. but it's clear that their family is a little bit dysfunctional, and they don't acknowledge anything about what happened with all of that. As Jayne and June go back to New York City, Jayne realizes that June doesn't intend to tell the mom about her cancer because she doesn't want to worry. They have their own lives to focus on. And from there, once they get back to New York City, the rest of the story takes place. Jayne realizes a few things about Patrick. She deals with Jeremy fully. June goes through cancer-related stuff and gets surgery. What happens with that, I'll leave for you to find out. But I will be discussing a little bit of that in the analysis section. In terms of analysis, there is quite a few things we're talking about with Yolk. One important thing that I will mention later is that it does feel very similar to the book Before I Fall, one of my favorite books that I've actually talked about on this channel before. There's a few similarities in sort of themes and sort of story ideas about cynicism that I'll get at in a few moments. And I think I really enjoyed the book because it has a similar flavor to that, and so this might end up on a year-end list for sure. But as I alluded to in my introduction, one of the main themes of this book is that of being seen. Jayne desperately wants to be noticed and feel important to others. I'm sure that's the case for many people, of just wanting to be noticed, of someone acknowledging you, and not feeling like people are overlooking you and not really giving you the attention that you think you deserve. And some of that might have to do with race, because people aren't really noticing Asian Americans, especially in New York, and so people just gloss over and think they can walk over these people. But it might also just have to do with the fact that she's not very out loud and outspoken, and people end up not really sensing that she's there, and that's partly again due to her mental health troubles that we see throughout the story. It's hard for her to really be out there when she feels like she doesn't deserve love or attention, and she's dealing with depression and hoping people don't notice her bulimia or her binge eating disorder. But there is that sense of wanting to be noticed. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "When I recognize people, it lets me hope that maybe they recognize me too." And that's a pretty short quote, but she's talking about being in New York and noticing some regular people, some eccentric people, and she's hoping that when she recognizes them, they also notice her, because it's just really, that's kind of the human experience of wanting to be seen by others, wanting to be acknowledged by others. It's a very short quote, but it gets at really a lot of what's going on in this story, of not wanting to be overlooked. But it's also interesting, again, there's the race factor, but there's also the New York factor. New York's a big city. It's, you can walk by a lot of people and not really notice them. And so there's a sense of difficulty in being recognized in New York City. And maybe that's why Jayne chose to go there, is that, maybe she doesn't want to be noticed. Maybe it allows her to sort of deal with her pain in a way where no one's going to talk to her about that, because people kind of don't really look at each other on the subway, but Jayne does. And as we find out later in the story, people are clearly noticing her and are very aware of what's going on for her, and whether or not they choose to reach out to her, that's another question entirely. And there's a lot of other factors too at play of why she's not getting noticed. She's the youngest. She's not really noticed by her mom, and when she is, she's heavily criticized. So that's creating a lot of desire to be noticed even more. That's not really working because her family's dysfunctional, and it does seem like she's picking the worst boyfriend possible. Again, maybe intentional in this story, a guy who's only using her for sex, really, and then when he's not getting that sex, he just invites other people, and he's noticing other women over Jayne. And it leads to feelings of jealousy and bitterness for her. And it leads her to binge and purge more because she's feeling all of that pain. And the binging and purging is related to the pain, as we find out in this story. But the ultimate question is, but does she really want to be noticed? Does she want to be seen? And we see throughout the story that she feels a lot of pressure when she is noticed. When people do look at her, she's like, whoa, I don't want any of this. And she pushes other people away. As her sister June attempts to come closer, and attempts to help her improve her life a little bit, she's like, no, I actually don't want this. I don't want to be closer. And she also tries to push Patrick away as he becomes closer. There's that sense that maybe she doesn't deserve a better life, that maybe she'll just bring down Patrick with whatever's going on for her. And it's a real fight for them to get into her life, to say, yes, you do matter. You can have these good things because you're somewhat of a good person. Ultimately, what this is all getting at, what Choi is acknowledging here, is that mortifying ordeal of being known, which was something described in a New York Times article years ago, about 10 or so years ago, at the time that I'm talking. Just the mortifying ordeal of being known, of wanting to be in a relationship, of wanting to be around other people, but the terrifying prospect related to that of being seen, of someone noticing all your flaws, of all your successes, and maybe it being a bit difficult to know that other people can see exactly how you see yourself. And that's a lot of what's going on for Jayne here. She wants to be seen, but she doesn't want people to know about her flaws or her pain or all the stuff that she's dealing with. There's a little stigma with that. There's a little fear that if they see the true her, they might run away. And that's really what a lot of the story is about. I like how Choi gets at that feeling of wanting to be seen, but also not wanting people to see everything. And, if you don't show everyone everything, they're not going to want to be around. In addition to this, Choi also highlights very well the differences between June and Jayne throughout the story. Choi does a phenomenal job of characterizing both of these characters and highlighting the major differences between the two, noting, how very vastly different these two seem, but also, are they really all that different? June is the oldest and the family favorite. Her mom and her father just speak very highly of her and want her to have the best in life. They're very happy that she has a high-paying job, and they frequently brag about her to the church people that they know in Texas. It's a good life for June in that way. She's very smart and very dedicated, and she doesn't really seem worried about what other people think, especially in high school, as she kind of forged her own path, much to the chagrin of Jayne, who felt like she was stupid for doing that, for not caring what other people thought. But she does come off a bit judgy in doing so, and much to the point where she's not really willing to see her own bad actions, that she blames other people for what happens, which is a little bit similar to Jayne, as we find. And then on the other side of things, Jayne's personality, she's ignored, she's the youngest. Both of those are kind of related. She feels like her name is just like secondhand to the name that June has, and a lot of family struggles that in a way that June didn't have to observe because she was, maybe more of the family favorite, and she certainly seems to be dealing with more mental health issues. As we see, Jayne, like she's dealing with a very heavy sense of depression, some sort of binge eating disorder. She's pushing people away. She's self-destructive in a terrifying way. As we know, as the narrator notes in the story, as Jayne herself notes, and she's narrating it through the story, like she causes her own pain, because no matter what pain others may cause her, like if you're causing your own pain, then they're not the problem anymore. It's you. And so she chooses to self-destroy in order to avoid the pain from from what other people are causing her. It's a terrible way to think, but Jayne thinks that it's helping her, and June doesn't really seem to have this self-destruct sort of drive within her. Despite these differences, they both seem equally shattered, both capable of doing terrible things, especially to one another. Allow me to read you another interesting quote from this. Her voice catches and she stuns me by bursting into tears. "Fuck," she says, arms finally falling to her sides. "How are you going to help me?" At this, she covers her eyes with her palms, shoulders heaving in heart-wrenching sobs. "I have literal fucking cancer, but we both know. We both know that you're sicker than me." And that's just an interesting quote, because it gets at some unspoken grief that June might be feeling. Like she's dealing with cancer, and she's being manipulative as well. You might not get that very much through this book, but she's very mean and rude to her sister. But there's some unspoken mental health issues below the surface that she's not really addressing. And you could argue that they're both kind of shattered in that regard. Like, they're raised in the same family. So, like, same environment is bound to produce similar kind of difficulties, even if they don't express themselves in the same way. And June is carrying those secrets as best as she can. So both dealing with something, and as June says here, like, I may be sick, like physically sick, but you're sicker than me, because we both know that you're dealing with something that we do not want to address. And I like how Choi characterizes these differences, but also notices that these two are very similar, and leaves it for the reader to kind of grasp that rather than directly acknowledging it, as you see throughout the story. Another thing we're talking about in this book is ethnic generational trauma. It's really just generational trauma, but I believe Choi is likening it to the Korean experience. So it feels like ethnic generational trauma, which is probably not a thing founded in any research, but is still worth talking about. Both Patrick and Jayne highlight their ethnicity and upbringing, and how it led to some mental health issues, some of which Patrick is dealing with and carrying very well, but Jayne is absolutely not able to deal with it. Both of them talk about the pressure of growing up, being expected to perform the best, and get over their sort of parents' humps when coming to America, like doing better than their parents, but also like being thankful for where their parents came from. A lot of expectations that are displayed in various ways and force a lot of pressure onto these two characters that ends up negatively affecting them over time. Choi really details how Jayne came to be where she is now, how there were a lot of pressures on her as she was growing up, but that those in themselves didn't lead her to this point. Jayne's relationship with her mother, based on her mother leaving, led her to sort of the binge eating disorder that she developed. And it sort of led her to the expectation of she can't rely on others, because that's, they'll only disappoint you, and you better control that pain yourself so that it doesn't drown you and overwhelm you. And a lot of that comes from her relationship with her mother, her relationship to her family, her sort of Korean upbringing, and a little bit about the discrimination in America is kind of underlying all of this beneath the surface. And this generational trauma, this ethnic generational trauma, is kind of acknowledged at the end of the story. She has a heart-to-heart with her mother while her sister's in surgery. Her mother talks to her about her own regrets, how she lost a child before Jayne was born, and that kind of overwhelmed her a lot, and how she was expected to be this perfect mother, but she didn't really have those skills either. And there's a lot of regrets that she had in life that she kind of wished she stayed in Korea rather than come to America. And it's very hard for her mother, and you kind of see that like the problems didn't start with Jayne. They've been there since the mother, and maybe even before her mother. That there's a lot of unfortunateness in the family that hasn't been addressed. Now that it is, maybe some more positive outcomes are likely to happen. And underlying even more so all of this is the fact that this might be an immigration story in the vein of Beautiful Country, where someone who didn't want to immigrate to America is forced to, and it causes a lot of suffering for them because they're now second-class citizens in this country. That happened for Jayne's mom in this story. Like, she's a lot of pressure and a lot of turmoil lead to further problems for the children down the line. So very interesting discussion of ethnic generational trauma, or really just generational trauma, and how it sort of helps us understand where Jayne is coming from and why Jayne is in the current position that she's in. Choi does a number of other great things in the story. She takes a lot of great care in talking about bulimia. I feel like other authors would just, report directly from the DSM-5 and it wouldn't feel as authentic. But here, I think Choi's kind of digging into her history and then talking about maybe her experience a little bit with bulimia or binge eating disorder. And it provides some authenticity to this story. Like, it's not merely someone talking about it. It's someone who's like showing the behaviors and patterns, and it feels a little too real in that regard. Like the suffering feels a little too authentic at times, and it comes off as a bit harrowing in this story. Maybe too much bad stuff happening to the character. And then in the same way, the self-destruction on display here, while it's very well written, again, it feels a little bit too real. The character is falling into some terrible patterns and even mean behavior at times, especially Jayne, where the things that she says to her sister and her friends are very unkind, and the things she does are not, it puts a little grayness to her overall character. And I do like how Choi does that. Like she has Jayne do some bad things, but she's not unworthy of love in that regard. Like there's still room for her to grow and heal from everything that she's dealing with. And then the last thing I'll note are the scenes where she writes Jayne's first encounter with Patrick, as well as the underlying sex scene, or just the sex scene later in the story between Patrick and Jayne. The thing I just love really the most about it is how Jayne's dealing with these sort of thoughts, this eating disorder, having a terrible time in her life. And here's finally Patrick, who looks beyond all of that, who shows her love and attention, and that she is worthy of all of that. And you see that when they meet in the bar, but you also see that in the very passionate sex scene that Mary Choi writes. Just noting that Choi, or Jayne, feels like she's in safe hands, and that Patrick provides her with a great sense of attention that she's really been craving. It's very passionate, very beautiful how she describes the sex scene. And there's hope that Patrick can be maybe the thing that she's been looking for this whole time. But as we find out later in this story, maybe Patrick is lying a little bit, and she has to deal with those lies, with that uneasiness that has arisen when she sees Patrick with another girl. And so a lot of very interesting things in that part of the story. I also want to note, as I said earlier in this video, how it feels similar but also quite different from Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver. One of my favorite books ever written. Before I guess I got to go into detail about it, but Before I Fall is about a high school girl who's trapped in a time loop, and she's got to figure out why she's stuck in there. And ultimately it goes back to another girl who's committing suicide each time in a time loop by getting hit by a car, and she has to reach out to that girl and prevent her from doing that. But a lot of in the story, like, she becomes more cynical as she goes through the time loop, and she kind of blames the person who's killing herself before realizing that she had some part to play in that character's emotion. And she's realizing that the cynicism that you develop in high school of cliques and wanting to push people away has sort of led to this behavior, and she needs to recapture some of the innocence she once had. Just very fascinating writing in that story. But a lot of that happens in this story as well, just in a different kind of inverse way, where the innocence of high school is lost to Jayne after her mother leaves, and she develops this sort of cynical take on the world that everyone is out to hurt her, and therefore she has to hurt herself before they can hurt her. Or she has to hurt herself harder than they hurt her, as June says in the story. And so there's that sense of cynicism that sort of it gives way to hope when she reconnects with June, but also when she connects with Patrick. But the cynicism never completely goes away. I think there's room at the end of the story for more trouble in relationships to develop. That this is a very negative take on the world, which I think is very bold on Mary Choi's part, to not simply wrap it up in a tiny a beautiful bow and say, hey, the world can be a great place. She says, the world can be great places in some aspects, but you have to put in the work, and you have to want to get better, and you have to want to really thrive and become a better person. And it feels really different from Before I Fall, because Before I Fall tries to clean things up a little bit, but in a way that makes sense with the story. And here, Mary Choi is not really doing that. And I do feel a lesser author would have tried to clean it up a little bit in order to make everyone happy. But there's a lot of room for relapse and more struggle for these relationships. And that's how families are. That's how real life is. And I think Choi does a really good job of capturing reality, capturing authenticity in this story. I don't really have too many problems with this story. I do think it's very well written and well paced, maybe a little too dense because there's a lot of like very heavy writing, things that you have to go back through and reread again. But if I would say like one problem, it's that the ending does feel a little too neat. I know after I just said that, she leaves it open and whatnot, but there is an attempt there in that she reunites with her sister. It's found out that Patrick broke up with this girl that he was with and that he wants to be with Jayne now. And she calls her mother before June's surgery, tells her about the cancer, and then her mother comes, and then they have a heart-to-heart where they deal with some of the things that have been going on in the family, including addressing why her mother left for those 3 months in the story. And it does seem like all of that's kind of resolved. And a little too neat how she was quick to sort of just pull all these threads together. But maybe I'm just noticing really good storytelling there. But as I mentioned before, like there is a sense of cynicism in this story that maybe the ending defies a little bit, but maybe that's also the point in that, hope and optimism and actually seeking to better yourself can defeat that cynicism in a way. So in a way, like this kind of the ending kind of makes sense, especially in the context of that cynicism. And as I mentioned before, like it doesn't completely like wipe the slate clean, but at the same time, it does feel a little too rushed and a little too quick in how she got to that ending and how she kind of sort of resolved all those threads that were going on. But again, it's not really a criticism there. It's just it's not enough to sink the story. It's just something I'm noticing. And those are my thoughts on Yolk. As I'm talking, I'm like 32 minutes in, which should probably be less and once I do my editing of the video. But I think that's another sign of how much I enjoyed the book, and that if I'm talking for 30 minutes about it, it has to be somewhat quality, at least to me. So definitely recommend it to you out there. Find it at your local library, but this also could be very much something that you'll want to purchase. I'm probably going to put it on a year-end list because it was that high quality. And I'm definitely going to seek out the other two books that Choi has written. If this is really good, I wonder what Permanent Record or Emergency Contact are going to be like. What the writing is gonna do there. It sounds really amazing, and I'm definitely going to seek it out. I might have found another favorite author, and I hope she continues to write more as well. But yeah, if you have any thoughts about this, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear from you and have a discussion. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Choi or Yolk if they don't know about the author or the book. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and sister reuniting travels. Farewell.